CoinDesk special mining week presented by Foundry is underway, where we take a closer look at the latest advancements and current challenges that remain in crypto mining. Foundry and CoinDesk are both owned by DCG. Joining us now to discuss is Gridless co-founder Erik Hersman. Erik, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on, guys.
Thank you.
Wonderful to have you here with us. Let's talk about this micro hydroelectric plant you have in Kenya that ladders up to Gridless's larger mission. I'll let you tell us about it because I don't want to talk at the audience for the next minute. So tell us about Gridless's mission and then tell us about what's going on in Kenya.
Yeah, thanks. So we've been operating on a local hydro facility for the last about 9-10 months. And it started off at this 50 kilowatt site that you see here, where we were just putting in 6 miners to take up the excess load of energy that was being created. And since then, it's grown to a 300 kilowatt site, a little bit larger. We also have on a site about this size, actually it's double this size, Malawi, in the mountains of rural Malawi. And next week, we're opening up a new one in Zambia. So we have 3 country sites. And yeah, it's been quite interesting because I think what most people don't understand about energy, especially energy in Africa, is that we represent a good portion of those people who don't have power around the world. And when you're in these rural areas and the sun goes down, it gets dark pretty quickly. And when you have light, it changes almost everything. And that power allows you to, have kids who can study at night. It allows there to be more security in the community. Helps you to irrigate fields, just all kinds of things. So, I think Bitcoin mining does a huge amount to allow energy to proliferate across the continent.
So it brings you're basically creating these sites that would provide energy, but what kind of infrastructure are you providing to the local communities? In other words, wiring and things like that, and cables, et cetera. How much of your expenses that you do how much of your revenue, how much of your expenses are involved in wiring the local communities that you're involved with?
Yeah, so we work with a local small power provider, usually an independent power producer that is building out that local mini grid. And so we're their largest buyer of energy, and they're the ones who roll out the power. So they're the ones who roll out the grid, and that grid can be fairly extensive. It can cover 5 or 10 kilometer radius from that site. And if you were ever with us on a site visit, you'd see all these cables going overhead, just like you would in any other neighborhood. And that's all provided by the independent power producer and their grid side of the house. And so that includes the customer service side too.
So what part are you providing? In other words, you're just sopping up the extra electricity. So what incentive then does the local power provider have to invest in infrastructure in those communities when they already have a willing buyer for whatever electricity that they have? In other words, how can you guarantee that some of that revenue, that additional revenue that you're providing the power producer, goes into creating more infrastructure for the communities?
Yeah, so what happens is they've already sunk money into building out these sites, and they've used up about 30 to 40% of their energy on providing electricity to the community, to local businesses and things like that. And they have somewhere between 70 and maybe 40% of the energy left over. So we come up there and like you said, we sop up that excess energy, and that's been super helpful for them. It helps them become sustainable. There's not a single mini grid that we've come across in Africa that is financially sustainable yet. And so with us, they're actually able to do that. What happens though is that because they're now financially sustainable, they can look at other things that they haven't been able to do before. So for instance, in Malawi, they were finally able, they had a backlog of 800 families who wanted to be connected to the grid, but they couldn't do so because the power producer wasn't profitable and couldn't buy the meters to connect in their homes. So when we signed on, we became their largest buyer, and they were able to sign on 200 more families within the next 3 months, and it actually connected for the first time. So those are the kind of things that can happen once we come in. Sometimes it also lowers the price of power to the community. It depends. So we see different things in Kenya than we do in Malawi, and I'm sure we'll see different things in Zambia on top of that.
What are you paying per kilowatt?
We don't pay per kilowatt. We don't have a floor price. We come in and we do a revenue share with them. So they make a percentage of the Bitcoin that we make.
Erik, we got to ask you about Greenpeace. They're advocating for Bitcoin to switch away from proof of stake. There's a big campaign about the energy consumption around Bitcoin mining going on right now. What are your thoughts on that campaign? And maybe do you have a response to it?
So about a month and a half ago, I released a document called Blueprint for Energy and Bitcoin Mining in Africa. And in it takes data from about 20 different reports, as well as our own data. And it shows that if you actually want energy to proliferate, we're in energy poverty here in Africa, where 600 million of the 1.2 billion people on the continent don't have power at all. They don't have any energy. So if we want to electrify people who live at the edges, and we want to push that energy further out, back kind of beyond where the current grid will be, then we need to have an anchor tenant that can sign on being a first and last buyer for that energy, so that these independent power producers will continue to build energy. And I think that's the biggest argument for it, right? There's obviously arguments in other parts of the world, but in our part of the world, Bitcoin is offering something that nobody else has been able to do for people who are trying to build out energy. And if you take that away, then you're also taking away electricity for hundreds of millions of people.
Erik, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining the show this morning.
All right. Thank you very much for having me.